You know Apollo as the god of music, the god of the sun, the beautiful golden Olympian who plays the lyre and writes poetry and is the face of the Olympians in every children's book about Greek mythology. That is not who Apollo was. The Greeks who actually worshipped him were afraid of him. They built his most important temple on the grave of a dragon he had killed. They wrote their greatest epic with Apollo as the opening thread. They said his arrows brought disease, and they meant it literally. Apollo's arrows were plague. This is the god nobody tells you about, the Apollo the Greeks themselves were scared of. The first thing that happens in the Iliad, the foundational text of Western literature, is Apollo raining plague arrows on the Greek army. Not Zeus, not Athena, not Ares, the actual god of war, Apollo. The Greek king Agamemnon has captured a young woman named Chryseis as a war prize. Her father, Chryses, is a priest of Apollo. He begs for his daughter's return. Agamemnon refuses and humiliates the priest in front of the army. Chryseis walks away and prays. Apollo hears him. Homer describes what happens next in very specific language. Apollo came down from Olympus like night. He drew his bow, and he began shooting. First the mules, then the dogs, then the soldiers, for 9 days. Men died in the thousands. The Greek army was being killed by an enemy they could not see. This is the first scene of the Iliad. Western literature begins with Apollo. The arrows themselves are worth understanding. In the ancient world, invisible arrows meant plague. A soldier who collapsed from no visible wound had been shot by a god. The Greeks did not know about bacteria or viruses. They knew about Apollo, and his bow was always strung, and his aim was always accurate. Apollo was not originally the god of music. He was the god of disease. His oldest worship title is Smintheos, meaning mouse god, because mice were associated with the spread of plague. Before Apollo was depicted as a beautiful youth with a lyre, he was a dark god with a bow. The bow was not hunting equipment. It was a weapon of mass infection. Some scholars trace Apollo's origins back further than Greek mythology itself, to older Near Eastern plague gods, Resheph in Syria, Nergal in Mesopotamia, deities whose arrows brought disease, whose attributes were the bow and quiver, and whose worshippers built temples to appease them because they could not defeat them. Apollo came into Greek religion as one of these gods. What changed is that the Greeks layered other functions on top of him over time. They gave him music. They gave him prophecy. They gave him healing. Eventually, they gave him the sun. But underneath all of that was the original Apollo, the one who killed with arrows you could not see. The Greeks did not forget this. They just moved it to the background. When a plague came, they knew who to pray to first. There is another Apollo who shows up in myth, the Apollo of love stories. His track record is worse than anyone's on Olympus. Daphne was a young nymph. Apollo saw her and decided he wanted her. She ran from him. He chased her through forests. She called out to her father, a river god, begging to be saved. Her father transformed her into a laurel tree. Apollo caught up to her as bark was closing over her skin. He declared the laurel his sacred tree. He wore a laurel wreath for the rest of eternity, in memory of the woman who chose being a tree over being with him. Cassandra was a Trojan princess. Apollo wanted her. She agreed to be with him in exchange for the gift of prophecy, the ability to see the future. He gave her the gift. Then she refused to sleep with him anyway. He could not take the gift back. So he added a curse. She would see the future correctly, and no one would ever believe her. Cassandra spent the rest of her life screaming true prophecies that everyone ignored: the fall of Troy, her own death, the murders that would follow, all of it correct, none of it heard. Coronis was a mortal woman Apollo loved. She became pregnant with his child. While pregnant, she had an affair with another man. Apollo's sister Artemis killed her with an arrow. As Coronis burned on her funeral pyre, Apollo reached into the flames and pulled their unborn son out of her corpse. The son was Asclepius, who grew up to become the god of medicine. Hyacinth was a young man Apollo loved. The two of them were throwing a discus together. The wind god Zephyr was jealous. He redirected the discus in midair, and it struck Hyacinth in the head, killing him. Apollo held him as he died and turned his blood into a flower. Every one of these stories has the same structure. Apollo wants someone. Something terrible happens to that person. Apollo keeps a trophy. The worst of it might be Niobe. Niobe was a mortal queen. She had 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters. She made the mistake of bragging that her children were more beautiful than Apollo's mother Leto's children, who were just Apollo and his sister Artemis. 2 children, verses 14. She said so publicly. Leto heard. Leto told Apollo and Artemis. Apollo killed all 7 sons with his arrows. Artemis killed all 7 daughters. Some versions say the children died slowly over days. Some versions say it was instant. All versions agree that Niobe had to watch. When Apollo and Artemis were finished, Niobe collapsed. She wept for 9 days. On the 10th day, the gods turned her into a stone that still weeps water. This is the god the Greeks worshipped. The god who killed 14 children because their mother said something insulting about his own mother. The lesson was not, do not cross Apollo. The lesson was, Apollo will destroy you for things that are not even about him. And let me know in the comments, if you were a Greek, would you still worship a god who could kill your children over something you never even said? This is the god the Greeks knew, not the sun god from children's books, not the beautiful lyre player in the sculptures. The real Apollo was the one who sent plagues, who punished for insults, who chased women until they became trees, who stood over burning funeral pyres, the one who opened the Iliad with 9 days of death. Apollo was not feared for his cruelty. He was feared for his distance. The other gods were reachable. You could argue with Zeus, bribe Hera, bargain with Hermes. Poseidon could be appeased with sacrifice. Ares could be bought with war. The gods were monstrous, but they were negotiable. Apollo was not negotiable. His arrows struck from a distance. His plagues arrived without warning. His curses were permanent. You could not see him coming, and you could not stop him once he had started. The best you could do, the only thing you could do, was keep him happy before he had any reason to notice you. That is why the Greeks built him his most important temple. That is why they sent offerings to Delphi. That is why every Greek city had an altar to Apollo. They were not celebrating him. They were paying rent on their own survival. Here is the last thing worth understanding about Apollo. His most sacred site was Delphi, the oracle, the place where kings came to ask the gods about their future and where the priestess of Apollo would give them cryptic answers that often led to disaster. Delphi was built on the grave of a monster. Before Apollo claimed it, the site was held by a serpent called Python. Python lived at the center of the earth, in a cave coiled around a sacred stone. When Apollo arrived, he killed Python with his arrows. The blood of the serpent soaked into the rock. Then Apollo built his temple on top of the body. The priestesses who gave prophecies at Delphi, the Pythia, sat on a tripod over a crack in the earth. Vapors came up from below. The priestess breathed them in and entered a trance. Then she spoke for Apollo. Some scholars now believe the vapors were actually ethylene gas, seeping from geological faults under the temple, which would explain the trances scientifically. But the Greeks did not know that. What they knew was that the god spoke through a crack in the earth that was also a dead monster's grave, that the woman who served as his voice was breathing in something that came from the underworld, that the predictions he gave were true, but they destroyed people anyway. Croesus, the richest king in the ancient world, asked Delphi if he should go to war with Persia. The oracle told him that if he did, he would destroy a great empire. He went to war. The empire he destroyed was his own. Apollo was not lying. He just knew exactly how people would hear what he said. Apollo was the god of music. He was also the god who sent the plague that opened the Iliad. He was the god of prophecy. He was also the god who gave Cassandra the gift of seeing the future and the curse of never being believed. He was the god of healing. He was also the god who killed 14 children because their mother insulted his mother. The Greeks did not see a contradiction. They understood that the God who cures disease is the same God who sends it, and that the God who tells you the future is the same God who arranges it. That is the Apollo they actually worshipped. Not the sun god, not the beautiful one in the museum sculptures, the one whose arrows you could not see coming.